Hi, so this begins the second road trip in the Great Offshore Grounds, road trip number 2, if you're following along. It's when Cheyenne leaves Washington State in search of a woman who may be her mother. Um, and the part I'm going to read is her trip down to Joshua Tree, and tonight I'm doing an event in virtual Joshua Tree. So this is called Lone Pine. U.S. Route 395 passes between the Sacagawea State Park and the Hanford Nuclear Plant. Over the lands of the Umatilla and the family graveyard of Kennewick men. Over the water-carved, channeled scablands that dug the Columbia River gorge and freed the great river, which now, dammed, floods the west with light. Cheyenne drove through the old mining settlements where Chinese workers had lived in tiger towns. What had Justine said? I want who I am to have nothing to do with anybody else. Cheyenne rolled the window all the way down to let in the crystal clean air. She did 80 miles per hour on the highway, slipped south between the mountains through towns founded by speculators who came without permission long ago. Drawn by the promise of the Comstock lode, they drilled and blasted the Virginia range, and the local natives could do nothing but watch as they went after the silver. A generation later, in 1890, a Paiute man with messianic visions manifested a dance. Drawing on elements from other nations, the dance united the spirits of the indigenous dead with those of the living. It infused the people with the powerful magic necessary to halt colonial expansion. Whites who saw it performed, unnerved by the spectral aura around the dancers, called it the ghost dance. It spread across the country, and in a rage of eerie faith it scorched the battlefield at Wounded Knee with a ghostly fire. I want to see through all of this and be free for real. Cheyenne spent the first night in the rest area in Central Oregon, but the cold kept her up. Livy would have had sweatshirts, a fisherman's cap, and a sleeping bag. Livy would have had money and a plan. Cheyenne had a bucket of peanut butter. At dawn she drove through the low hills scorched by the summer fire season. The blackened spears of trees, even with the windows up, the car smelled like smoke. There were patches of green pine where the fire had jumped and the sky filled with golden eagles. She spent another terrible night in a rest area. Coming into the Inyo Valley, she watched for black ice as the sun burned the mist away, exposing the forest floor, a tinder of pine cones, also a ghostly dance. The landscape flattened into the foothill canyons and scrub brush creeks. The Alabama Hills came into view. Named in the Civil War for the Confederate raider CSS Alabama, the hills are where Gunga Din and the Lone Ranger were shot. They are where the Arapaho attacked and how the West was won, back when it was greener. Now they are the dusty gladiatorial arena in ancient Rome. They are Afghanistan. The Owens River, stolen and forced 300 miles west by the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, no longer feeds the land. It is also a ghost. Haunting the aqueducts disappearing within sight of the sea. Cheyenne felt the spook of familiarity everywhere. Justine rode in the car beside her. I sense a greatness in myself, but I don't know what kind. Cheyenne pulled into a gas station and parked by the bathrooms. She'd had little sleep for 2 days. Joshua Tree was only an hour west, and would probably have safer places for her to park her car and nap. Jackson had mentioned a former student of his, Ben, was living there now. She might be able to find him, though she wasn't entirely sure how that would go. She and Ben had been close once, not under the best of circumstances. The idea of seeing him made her slightly nauseous. She had a genuine affection for him at one point, but then again there were a lot of ways to tell the stories of those years, and most were not a portrait of victory. She doubted she liked his version. Still, in an emergency, she wouldn't feel weird about calling him. Maybe like if she got stabbed. But that's the great thing about emergencies. Everyone has to drop everything they think about each other and act like a human. Sadly, her being a fuck-up was not an emergency. Outside, the Mojave Desert stretched before her. She made a sandwich on the hood of the Toyota. She was lonely. It wasn't a new feeling. A few feet from where she stood, the poured cement of the gas station parking lot ended and the desert began. She hadn't expected it to have a sound, but it did, a baseline noise of rattlesnakes and sidewinders, camel spiders and drone flies. The wind blew at the back of her legs and through the scrub brush. She pulled out the Kennedy $50 she'd put in the ashtray. "You'll never go to jail if you're riding with a Kennedy." She rubbed it between her hands. "Heads, straight to El Paso. Tails, Joshua Tree." She tossed the coin and caught it, slapping it onto the back of her hand. "Heads." This is why flipping a coin never works. So the rest is in Joshua Tree.